long time ago, it used to be that the controller that came with the console was the best controller that you could use. The third-party options were usually of a lesser quality and regulated to younger siblings or friends that you didn't quite like. These days, though, that couldn't be further from the truth, as pro controllers have become an extremely big market, with players like Scuff Gaming, Razer, and PowerA being huge players in that category. Even first-party console manufacturers have jumped into the trend with the Xbox Elite controller and PlayStation's back button attachment. These controllers all have their very own distinct features, but one thing they all have in common is that their price usually exceeds the cost of a more traditional controller. That's where the Recon controller from veteran headset manufacturer Turtle Beach comes in to shake things up, presenting at a price less than the cost of a traditional controller with an MSRP of only $59.99 and coming with ample pro features. It may end up doing just that. In the box is where you can see some of the costs being cut initially, because it's missing some features that you come to expect with more expensive pro controllers, like additional thumbsticks, a carrying case, or perhaps additional faceplates. But don't worry too much though, because everything that is here seems to be of a very high quality. The included USB-C cable is braided, seems like a really strong cable with nice Velcro to keep it snug, and it's approximately 10 feet, which is pretty long and does a great job. The USB-C adapter port is actually recessed, which makes plugging this in very nice, which is a good feeling. You also have the manual here as well, which is something that you're going to need to reference at least once, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And for those of you on the edge of your seat wondering, yes, it does include the iconic Turtle Beach sticker, so don't worry about that. Now, you probably noticed during this mini unboxing that yes, it is a wired controller, which could be a turnoff to some who are very used to using a wireless controller, as that is what comes with the console traditionally. But the wireless technology in the Xbox controller is kind of a closely guarded secret, for lack of a better word, and most third-party manufacturers are forced to go the wired route. So if wireless is a no-go, or has to be wireless for you, I'm sorry about that, but if wired's okay, then I think you might want to stick around for this one as we talk about what makes this controller so great. Okay, so seeing that the Turtle Beach Recon controller does share a lot in common with the original Xbox controller based on its form factor and button layout, I think that a good place to start is to kind of talk about the similarities between the two controllers. So starting off with the D-pad, you can see that the Recon controller has the same circular D-pad as the original Xbox controller, but the audible feedback here is noticeably different, with the Recon controller having a quite mushy sound effect when you're hitting the button. Now, for me, the way I play games, the D-pad is often regulated to kind of navigating menus or sending a quick text message to a friend. So personally, I actually prefer it to be less audible. It's just a little bit less annoying to hear that feedback. However, the tactileness of what you get with the original Xbox controller is probably a lot better for anyone who's looking to play a fighting game or something that's heavily reliant on the D-pad. Moving on to the face buttons, they are very similar indeed, with the Turtle Beach opting for a painted on iconography, and again with much mushier button mechanisms here. They feel a lot more like the Xbox 360. With the original Xbox controller, of course, having the buttons sitting in a resin, which gives them that 3D effect, which is quite nice, and they are also a lot louder in comparison. Personally, I don't think there's a big difference between either of them, although I do prefer the kind of mushiness of these buttons because I'm so used to the 360 controller, as that's personally my favorite console of all time. Now, moving on to the thumbsticks, they are quite similar between the two. I don't know if it's going to be picked up on the camera, but the original Xbox controller thumbsticks are slightly wider, very slight, so it does give you a little bit more surface area, which I think gives them a little bit of an edge, but grip along the edge here is exactly the same. I don't know how well the camera's picking that up, but both controllers have that very textured edge here, which is very nice. They feel literally stock almost here. The differences are very, very, very minor, and that is actually a benefit for the Turtle Beach Recon controller. A lot of times you have lower budget controllers sacrificing quality here on the thumbsticks, where there really isn't much of a difference between them, if I do say so myself. I do slightly prefer these, like I said, but there's really nothing wrong with these sticks, and they are extremely good for the price. Over here, where the Turtle Beach is technically a Series S, Series X controller, you're going to see the same layout of the start, view, and share buttons, although there is one kind of sort of flaw, I guess, with these here. You can see with this Recon module up here that the kind of center front of the controller is very, very cluttered, and we'll talk about that Recon module a little bit later. It's very, very cool, but that doesn't give you a lot of space to kind of have these buttons here, and you can see anytime I go to press the start button, or even worse, the menu button, my thumb is always hitting the thumbstick here. It's not super annoying if you're playing a game where you're not going to press the start button that much. Like most games, the start button is simply just a way to pause the game. But if you're playing a looter like Destiny, for example, a lot of times the start button is how you bring up your gear, which is something that you're going to do quite often, and always hitting the thumbstick every time you do that is a little bit annoying. And every time you want to take a screenshot or record a video, you have to kind of search for that, and you're always hitting the thumbstick, which is quite annoying. In contrast, the original controller obviously doesn't have as much going on here, so it gives these buttons more room to breathe, and of course, you're not really hitting anything when you go to hit these buttons here. Looking at the top of the controller here, you can see that they have the same exact layout with the same exact buttons. They're both USB-C as well, but there are some differences here. Starting with the Recon controller, you can see that they have a very rough textured finish here on both the trigger and the bumper, as well as these buttons on the back that we'll talk about a little bit later. But this is a very, very rough texture. You'll notice on your original controller that there is kind of a textured finish on the grip here, but the little nubs that are on the triggers here and the bumpers are a little bit more raised, and so they're a lot rougher on your finger. They feel kind of like the dumbbells, the old metal dumbbells, if you've ever went to the gym or anything like that. They are quite rough, and it did feel really weird at first, but I will say the longer that I played the games, the longer that my gaming sessions went, the more I went to appreciate these, because it does actually add quite a bit of grip to the triggers, and the triggers themselves have a much wider surface area, as you can see here with my finger. A lot more of my finger is on the triggers when I'm pressing them, in contrast to the original controller, which has a much more narrow surface area, which makes these honestly feel a little bit nicer to press. One thing that I will say though is the bottom out of these is quite clicky. They really kind of smash into the casing here, which I wasn't a huge fan of, where the bottoming out on the original controllers is quite nice, if I do say so myself. The bumpers here on the original controller are also a lot longer, which initially made me feel like they would be much easier to press, where these ones are quite short, but they're raised a little bit. However, in practice, I really had no issues hitting these, and these are a lot softer as well, which you may like, you may not like. They're almost inaudible. They're so soft when you press them. So those are the top buttons there. And those are the major similarities between the two controllers. Moving on to the differences between the controllers, we're first going to start at the back. Now I want to preface this by saying that I personally use a charging dock for my original controller, and so that's why you see this back plate here. Typically there's nothing on the back of this controller, it's just plastic, but on the Turtle Beach Recon controller, of course, you have the Pro controller staple, these back buttons here. I will give them a lot of props for opting for this kind of placement of the back buttons, as it's my personal favorite. I feel like this is just the most ergonomic solution here, as that is kind of naturally where your fingers will rest when you're holding a controller. If you pick up your original controller at home and just kind of hold it in your hand and look at where your fingers lie, this crease here where the paddles meet the back plate is exactly where your fingers naturally go. So there's very little kind of learning curve to get your head around pressing these buttons, which is very, very nice. Personally, my daily driver for a Pro controller is the the Razer Wolverine controller, which has the exact same placement, and it just feels so nice to have them there. That's personally my favorite setup, so I'm really happy that Turtle Beach went with that setup here. They're just very, very nice. Additionally, a major difference is, of course, this Recon module that we touched on briefly earlier. That is going to be your center for controlling all things audio with the controller. Of course, you see that there is a volume knob or volume dial right here, which is going to raise the volume of the controller. You have your chat rocker here, which is going to control the balance between game volume and voice chat. You also have a dedicated mute button here, which is quite nice and quite handy if you're going to have a quick sneeze in the middle of a gunfight. It's very nice to be able to press that and not have your teammates listen to your nostrils. But those features in general are actually somewhat common with aftermarket controllers. You see manufacturers like PowerA or Victrix often have a button here at the bottom, which will convert your D-pad into a quasi volume controller where you can adjust the chat volume and balance here and the game volume and balance with up and down. So that in and of itself is very, very handy, especially the mute button, but they're not necessarily groundbreaking new tech. However, that's not where the Recon module ends. There's a lot more to it than that. Starting with the equalizer modes, you can on the fly switch your equalizers from the Turtle Beach standard audio mix, which is what I typically use most of the time, to a treble boost or a bass boost, which is pretty self-explanatory. But they also offer a voiceover mode, which is quite neat. It's going to really raise the vocals or the sound spectrums where the vocals normally lie. So if you're just having a party chat and you want it to sound a little bit better, you can do that. Or if you're listening to a podcast like Season Gaming Bitcast, for example, you can get really good vocal noise from that mode, which is quite nice to have on your controller. But in addition to that, you have this mysterious button right here. This button enables the superhuman hearing mode, which I get it is a little bit overdone on the marketing. However, it is a quite handy feature to have at your fingertips. What it's going to do is it's going to raise the sound spectrums that things like footsteps or gunshots typically lie on, and it's going to increase that dramatically while decreasing some of the other sound spectrums in your game that might clutter that footstep or that gunfire. And what that does is it's going to give you that tactical advantage over enemies that are approaching you from behind or around a corner and stuff like that. To give you kind of a real world example, I play a lot of Apex Legends, which when you're just diving off the ship and you're going and you're landing, you're hot dropping, you're having fun, it's nice to have that Turtle Beach signature audio mix because you can hear all the abilities go off, you can hear the dialogue from the other characters in the game. It just sounds really, really good. I really enjoy that stereo mix. But when you get to the end of the game and there's only a couple teams left, being able to quickly hit this button, enable superhuman hearing mode, and hear that squad come up behind you or hear that enemy approaching the corner that you're hard scoping on, that can be the difference between winning and losing. And this button in and of itself has single-handedly won me some engagements and won me some games in stuff like Apex Legends, which is very, very cool. There is also the option here to switch the sensitivity of the right thumbstick on the fly. You could, for example, if you're in a situation where you have a sniper rifle and somebody's off in the distance, you could automatically or dynamically decrease your sensitivity to make that long range shot a little bit easier and then flip it back to normal for your everyday combat situations. But in practice, it's a little bit clunky. The process of switching the sensitivity modes involves holding a button for 2 seconds and then selecting a profile, which is a little bit, those 3 to 4 seconds it takes to get that feature enabled is a lot of times the difference between somebody being in your line of sight and then being out of your line of sight. So it's not very convenient. If it was as simple as pressing a button like the superhuman hearing mode, I could see it being a lot more advantageous, but as it stands with its current implementation, it's not something that I used too often. Now, being that this is a budget controller, I thought it would be good to spend a little bit of time on explaining why stuff like the back buttons are kind of an advantage for a controller like this, because I feel like a lot of people that are interested in this controller may be buying their very first Pro controller because the price is just so appealing. So I played a few games during my testing with this, and I'll only talk about a couple of them here. But for example, I did play a lot of Halo Infinite, which if you are in the market for an Xbox controller, chances are you've heard of a little game called Halo. And what I did is I tied the jump button to this back button here and the crouch button to this one. Now in Halo Infinite, a lot of the shooting mechanisms, reloads, grenades, and stuff like that are going to be tied to these buttons, so you're not necessarily going to need to take your fingers off the thumbsticks, but jump is A and crouch is B, and a lot of the kind of things in the map that can separate a casual player from a pro player is knowing how to do some very tricky jumps and ways to navigate the map, and almost all of them are going to involve slide jumping, which is sprinting and then crouching and then jumping, or crouch jumping, which is jumping and then crouching in midair. And anytime you have to remove your thumb from the thumbstick in order to hit these buttons, you're going to sacrifice some sort of aiming, because you can no longer aim when your thumb is not on this. So being able to click in the thumbstick to sprint and then quickly jump and crouch in the air while aiming at the same time is going to give you a slight advantage. And to be honest, guys, when you are dealing with your growth within a game, any slight advantage can make a really big difference. In something like Apex Legends, I do the same thing where I have my jump and crouch on these two buttons, and being able to sprint, slide, aim, jump, and then still be able to aim in midair, or be able to pop aim a tactical ability or something like that, makes a really big difference. In something like Gears of War, which is another game I play a ton of, being able to aim your melees, because I tied my melee here, I also tied my cover to this button as well. Being able to cover bounce into a melee is very convenient, because oftentimes the melee button is B and I can't aim my melee because I have to take my thumb off the aim in order to hit it. Now that's only a fraction of a second to do that, but sometimes that is the difference between hitting or missing a melee. So there are a lot of advantages that you can have with just the addition of these two buttons here. So it's definitely worth it to pick up a controller like this. Like I had mentioned, my daily driver is the Razer Wolverine controller, and one of the big differences between this one and the Turtle Beach, it does have the same buttons here, but it also has two additional buttons up here. Now, I get it that this is a budget controller and you're already getting a ton in this package, but having those two additional buttons is something I would love to see in perhaps a pro model of this or their next iterations. Maybe some buttons here or up here, something like that, because going back to those games that I talked about, the ability to reload is usually tied to the X button, and in Halo Infinite, for example, the ping is tied to your D-pad. So in order to reload, you can't aim, and in order to ping, you can't move, which obviously is a little bit inconvenient. So in Halo Infinite, I tie my reload to this button and my ping ability to this button, so I can always move and ping and aim at the same time, and I can jump, crouch, reload at the same time while aiming. Those types of things may not seem like they make a big difference, but the amount of times you're going to pull off those maneuvers in the game, and those few seconds that you save every time you do it, or like fractions of seconds, they do add up and they can make a big difference. And being that the Turtle Beach Recon controller has such a good price, it's a very quick and easy way financially to get into the pro controller market and really see what a difference buttons on the back of the controller can really make. Overall, for just $59.99 US dollars, I actually got this for $39.99 on a sale. This is a fantastic value for somebody looking to get into the pro controller scene. It has a very good build quality and honestly has some features within this Recon module that you can't get on controllers that cost 2, 3, or even 4 times as much. It is extremely hard to go from using this every day and having such good control over your game's audio, your microphone, and of course the superhuman hearing mode. It's very difficult to go back to other controllers, even if I'm going back to controllers that have more buttons like the Wolverine or more features like the Elite controller where it's even wireless. So this is a great controller. I definitely give it a recommendation, even for people that are looking for a backup controller for their already super expensive pro controller, or even as a gift for somebody. It's just a really good value. So I definitely give it my personal recommendation. Thank you so much for tuning in to Seasoned Gaming for this controller review. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you were able to get anything out of this video, please remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Also, feel free to join us on Discord, where we're constantly talking about video games and controllers and the like. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a good one. Take care.